Hey, everybody. Welcome to an all new episode of the Analyst's College Football Day to Day Show presented by Stats Perform. I am your host, Mike Leon. A huge week of the college football season, a bunch of top 25 matchups all across the place. And we break it all down, featuring stats and insights from not only the good folks over at the Analyst, but also using Stats Perform's new tool called PressBox Live. You can head to statsperform.com today to find out how PressBox Live is being utilized by college football teams, leagues, broadcasters, and more to help augment their game day coverage on Saturdays. You watch us on video, you listen to us, audio podcast platforms. If you aren't already a subscriber, do me a favor, hit the subscribe and follow button. Leave us a 5-star review and comment, please. We are working hard for those reviews, Evan. Actually, we aren't paid for this. Anyway, joining me to break down this weekend's slate of huge matchup, as always, is the Will Arnett to my Jason Bateman, data scientist at Stats Perform and a writer over on The Analyst. You can check out his work on theanalyst.com. And that's Mr. Evan Boyd. Evan, welcome back, buddy.
I love that comparison. Illusions, Michael. Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to be back with another great week of college football.
Very well said there. Check out Arrested Development, obviously, on Netflix. Evan, let's get right into it, man. Enough with the smart lists and Will Arnett, Jason Bateman comparisons, because there's a lot of games coming up here. It's a perfect time to be recording. We got week 5 of the college football season, technically week 6 if you count week 0. And last week, a bunch of things happening. We saw a wild 2 overtime game, in Wake Forest as Clemson won towards the end there in double overtime, batting down that pass. We saw Tennessee beat the Gators as Rocky Top Tennessee can still be heard blasting over in Knoxville. We saw some upsets. Speaking of Tennessee, Middle Tennessee State coming down here into Miami and absolutely rocking the Hurricanes like Hurricane Ian is rocking Florida right now. I'm in Miami myself. What are some of your surprises so far as we approach the true week 5 here of the college football season?
Well, first off, stay safe. I know you're still in Miami, but I hope you're doing all right. Most importantly there. But
Appreciate that.
Yeah, staying safe is much more important than college football, but not by much. But yeah, there have been a lot of surprises so far this year. I think there are a few obvious ones. You mentioned Miami losing, and Miami, oof, where are they going right now? That's a weird program that Mario Cristobal's got going right now. They do not seem to be as good as we expect them to be. But Kansas is 4-0 for the first time since 2009. That also happened to be the last year where they had 4 wins. So Rock Chalk Jayhawk, I hope they can be ranked soon. They deserve it, especially if they win their next couple of games. But there's one team that I really want to focus on, though, and that is Minnesota. They are actually jumped up to 5th in Stats Perform's TRACR, and I just want to explain TRACR quickly. It's basically a net efficiency metric that evaluates how well a team does based on who they play, and it's trained on multiple years of college football data, and basically it's just a good way to show how good teams are compared to others and how well they do against good teams and bad teams. It rewards teams on how good they play against other good teams and punishes those if they don't do as well against weaker teams. But Minnesota has done really well all across the board. We saw them last week really dismantle Michigan State. And Michigan State's an okay team right now, but some places don't have the Gophers as high. We do. We really think that they are legit. And we finally have a team that can go and win the Big Ten West. It was a wild, wild West, we thought, at the start of the season. We thought maybe Wisconsin was going to go, but it seems like Minnesota might be the clear cut here. So they've put up at least 500 yards in 3 straight games, something that they have not done since 2005. And I really like their balance on offense and on defense. They have really veteran leadership on their offense with Tanner Morgan. He's had 10 pass TDs in 13 games last season. He's had 7 already this year. They also have Muhammad Ibrahim back. Remember, he was hurt all last year. He got hurt in week 1 against Ohio State. Now he's back. He's averaging 6.4 yards per carry. So that's really impressive offense that they got going on there. But really, I've been surprised at how well they've done on the defensive end. I really didn't think that this was going to happen for Minnesota, but it really has. They've held the Spartans to 7 points and 38 rush yards. Michigan State entered that game averaging 38 points and 166 rush yards. So really see a difference there. And we've seen good teams from Minnesota, but this might be their best one under PJ Fleck, especially on the defensive end. So I think it's time to row the boat. I think the Gophers can be the ones representing the Big Ten West in Indianapolis here. Minnesota has never done that before in the Big Ten championship game, where they will eventually be defeated by Ohio State. But that's not important right now. The point is that they are doing really well, and I'm quite surprised. And Tracer loves them. I think they are one team to really watch going in there. I know they're now ranked in the AP poll, but I think they might even be a top 10 team.
Yeah. I mean, I watched a lot of that game, and Michigan State was never in it. They scored a touchdown, obviously, late. They got trounced there. Minnesota was dominant in the first half, dominant in the second half, really playing good defense all across the board there. PJ Fleck, obviously, I'm familiar with him, a former Rutgers assistant under Shiano back in the day. I want to give a surprise team that I've had my eye on always, and they're here in the state of Florida. Last season, this team started 0-4, replaced their quarterback, and since then, they've been pretty much on a roll, and their coach's job was saved because of this. And I'm talking about the Noles up in Florida State, because Jordan Travis has been 9-2 as a starter over his last 11 games. Florida State right now is 4-0. They just dismantled Boston College this past weekend, and they have a huge game now up at the Doak this weekend. We'll see what happens with weather in terms of that game maybe getting shifted somewhere else. Right now, it looks like it's going to happen there, but two ranked teams as Wake Forest comes to town off of a loss against Clemson. I'm really impressed with what the Noles have been able to do this year. They've had a pretty tough schedule. If you look, besides the first game of the season, which really didn't matter to them. I mean, they were playing Dartmouth, but Duquesne. But then you get into, obviously they had a neutral site game against LSU, which everybody saw that, and that amazing win 24-23 at the buzzer there. They play Louisville on a Friday night and go win at Louisville as Jordan Travis gets hurt in that game, doesn't play in the second half. I've just been really impressed with what the Noles have been able to do, and then dismantling Boston College this past week as they were up 7-0 before anybody can sit down in their seats as the opening kickoff was taken to the house. So very impressed with what Coach Norville has been able to do up in Tallahassee, and I'm really surprised. I'm not really surprised. I mean, because just of the tough non-conference that they had, the schedule-wise, in terms of at LSU, and then opening up on the road at Louisville to start conference play. But kudos so far to Mike Norville, as his team is 4-0, and I know a lot of people in Tallahassee are very excited about that start. Evan, let's get into some of our games, because the Noles are going to be one of the matchups we're going to spotlight here. There's a bunch of top 25 matchups this week. I mentioned this already, that what a perfect time for you and I to be recording because of all the high-profile games across the Big Ten, SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC. Let's start in the Big Ten, where you and I both reside in terms of our fandom. Michigan is heading to the Big Ten West against Iowa, a rematch of last year's Big Ten championship game. Obviously, Iowa just trounced my Scarlet Knights, although Rutgers helped in that game with two big turnovers that were taken for a pick six and a fumble recovery to the house by Iowa. Michigan last week in a tough game against Maryland at the Big House. Maryland was in that game, really played really well. Tua was playing lights out there for Maryland. They just weren't able to score there late, and obviously we saw what Blake Corum looked like on the offensive side of the football. He was an animal in that game. But Michigan heads to Iowa now. This is a pretty every time the games are at Iowa, it seems like they always come down to the wire, and it's a last-second field goal that's made to win the game. What's your read on what's going to happen Saturday out in Kinnick Stadium?
Yeah, Iowa's kind of a funny team this year, aren't they? They're ninth overall in Tracer, but that's mostly because of their defense. Their defense is fantastic this year, and we've seen that. We saw that in week one. Remember, they had all those safeties that they defended against. So that was really great. They have the second best defensive rating behind Alabama, according to Tracer, but offensively, they rank 53rd. This is a team that ranks first in scoring defense in the FBS, but rank third to last among Power 5 schools in offense. So, and I think that helps with all, their like you said, all the touchdown recoveries that they had against Rutgers, and as well as those safeties that have. That's been most of their points. So offensively, they really got to be better. But it has gotten better a little bit. After scoring a combined 14 points in its first two games, Iowa scored 54 in its last two. So, as you said, some of that was defensively, but still, the offense has sparked up a little bit in there. The rushing game has been a lot better. They might have found an answer to their running game with Caleb Johnson. The freshman did not play that much in Iowa's first two games, but he broke out against Nevada, and he had an okay game against Rutgers. So watch out for him to possibly be the offense that Iowa really needs. But if we know running games, it's all about Michigan because Michigan has had a fantastic running game last season and this season. They've really carried it over. Especially on Blake Corum, as you mentioned. Over the last 2 games, Corum's rushed for 314 yards and 7 touchdowns. It's just unreal numbers. His 243 rush yards against Maryland were the most by Wolverines to Denard Robinson in 2010. And, as you mentioned before, they had a tough game against Maryland. It was probably closer than anyone expected, but Michigan is still really good offensively to carry games, and I think that game was less about Michigan not living up to expectations, but rather how good Maryland might be this year. But TRACR has Michigan at a 60% chance of winning this game, but I am actually going to pick the upset here. I think Iowa, with the home field advantage, could actually pull one out, and it's going to be a tough, gritty Big Ten battle. This might be one of those games where you see drive after drive, punt, 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 punt. But I think Iowa, if they can play their own game, which they can at home, I think they are going to be the ones to knock off Michigan in this one.
That's a good pick. Iowa obviously has one of the best punters in the country, and we saw that on display last week against Rutgers. Although a lot of punting in that game, and both teams have All-American punters in that game. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think Kinnick Stadium at home. This game obviously is slated for an afternoon start, but regardless, I think Michigan right now hasn't really played anybody of note. We've seen what they've done against the Hawaiis and UConns, and obviously that game against Maryland, probably the best competition that they've played so far with a quarterback who can potentially, make an NFL roster, whose brother already is leading the number one team potentially in the NFL right now in the Dolphins. So I think that was probably the biggest test. And to me, Michigan, if it wasn't for, a fourth down call where Blake Corum kind of bounced it to the left and was able to hit the hole and score a late touchdown in the first half,
Yeah.
that Maryland probably could have won that game, to be honest with you. I like Iowa here. I like what I saw last week against my alma mater. They just really played sound defense, and they just kept changing field positions, and they kind of lean on you in terms of that. Just keep punting it, pin you down deep, make you go 95 yards, the length of the field, and they bend but don't break in a lot of situations. And I think home crowd. I know offensively they're challenged. But maybe last week they got a little bit of the offense rolling, scoring 13 points there, and the defense scoring the rest of the points off of turnovers. I like Iowa in that game as well. Let's go to the SEC. Let's drive on down to Ole Miss, and let's say hello to the folks over there. The Running Rebels get set to take on the Kentucky Wildcats. Probably one of the surprises we haven't mentioned in the college football season so far. The 7th-ranked Kentucky Wildcats head to Ole Miss in the Grove to take on the 14th ranked Ole Miss Running Rebels. Kentucky so far 4-0 this year. Haven't really played anyone other than at Florida, where they won 26-16 out in week 2. They've played University of Miami, Youngstown State, Northern Illinois. Those were all home games and all easy wins for the Wildcats, whereas opposed to Ole Miss, kind of the same thing. Ole Miss, Central Arkansas, they've played Troy in week 1. They blanked the Georgia Tech, and we've seen the struggles that Georgia Tech has had this year. And then last week, a little bit of a closer game late against Tulsa. Both teams 4-0, a prime SEC East versus West matchup. What do you got here with Kentucky heading to Ole Miss?
Well, I actually am going to slightly disagree with you of what you just said. I think Kentucky has been tested a little bit here. They do have that road win against Florida, which I think is bigger than you might be qualifying with them, but that's just fine. I think that's still impressive. And, they probably should have beaten Northern Illinois by more last week, but some of those points for Northern Illinois came in garbage time, so I'm not too worried about that. What I am a little bit worried about is Kentucky's rush game. It has not been that special in any game this season, and so I'm trying to wonder what they really have in store there if they decide or if Ole Miss decides to focus entirely on pass defense. What are they going to do on the ground? The passing game has looked really good, though. Kentucky has 3 players with over 200 receiving yards this season. That includes Tavion Robinson, who's averaging 87 receiving yards per game. That's second in the SEC besides Mizzou's Dominic Lovett. So he's doing really well there, and they have lots of options in the air there. So I think Kentucky can have a really big chance offensively over Ole Miss. But in terms of not being tested enough, I don't think Ole Miss has been tested that much either. This is their first SEC game of the year, and while the Rebels' rushing game has been incredible, I do wonder how fare against their toughest opponent so far this year. What I like about the rushing game, though, is that it's been balanced for Ole Miss. Rebels have 3 players averaging over 6 yards per rush with at least 25 rushes. The only other FBS team with at least 3 such players is Kansas, who, by the way, as I mentioned before, should definitely be ranked, but I hope that changes this week. Anyways, so I think that Ole Miss might be able to have a little bit of a challenge here, but TRACR has this game at 68% in favor of Ole Miss. I think a lot of that has to do with them being at home. So I'm going to go with Ole Miss on this one. I think it won't be as exciting of a game as the AP matchup might project because it's a number 7 versus a number 14 team. TRACR thinks both teams are a little bit more overvalued than those rankings, but I think it'll still be a good game, and I think Ole Miss will take the one here.
I'm going to go the opposite way, just because I want to spite you and go the opposite way. No, I'm kidding. Let me give you some stats and insights, though, presented by PressBox Live. You can head to statsperform.com today to check out how this fantastic new tool helps college teams, leagues, and broadcasters augment their game day coverage. Ole Miss, you mentioned it, that they're 4th in the FBS with 280 yards rushing per game. Kentucky 16th nationally in total defense. But take a look at this stat. Ole Miss is 15-2 under Lane Kiffin when scoring first and 4-6 when not. I think Kentucky scores first, takes a little bit of the crowd out of the game. The home team has won the last 4 of 6 in this series, but I am with you. Not to belittle the win that Kentucky had at Florida. I think that's the best win that either of these programs have had. But I think when you look at the other teams that they've played, nobody has played anyone of note other than Kentucky winning at Florida, already getting the SEC juices going and playing competition that is like-minded. So I think Kentucky will be prepared for this game. I love what they do defensively. They're 15th in pass efficiency on offense. I like Kentucky in this game, so I'm going to go opposite of you, and they'll get a win there in the Grove, and everyone that will be tailgating still afterwards will leave disappointed. Let's go into our third matchup. We'll stay in the SEC because this is happening down in Fayetteville as the Alabama Crimson Tide head to Arkansas to take on the 20th ranked Razorbacks. Alabama, you know where they are right now so far. They are 4-0. They have had one scare, which we all know about. Nevin and I covered it when they played Texas a few weeks back. But since then, it's been easy skating in Tuscaloosa as they've beaten Louisiana Monroe 63-7, Vanderbilt 55-7, Utah State 55-0. I mean, just do the simple math there. That's 10 points against 3 opponents, whereas they scored over 170 points in all of those matchups. The offenses look good. But this is a Razorback team that has played pretty well so far. Obviously, a tough loss on the neutral site game against A&M last week. We saw what they did against Cincinnati in week 1, beating the Bearcats there. They beat South Carolina as well in week 2, and then a win against Missouri State. So the Razorbacks 3-1. Alabama coming in. What do you expect here in this SEC West matchup?
I want to talk about Arkansas first because I've been high on Arkansas all season. I really like them. I think they're good enough to make a New Year's Six bowl. I was actually kind of thinking about it in my head, who might they play in that? And I was thinking like maybe Texas, who they have that similar matchup with Texas A&M. Or no, excuse me, they haven't played yet. I'm sorry, but I don't know, Texas, Baylor, one of those Big 12 teams might be a fun one. But anyways, they were so close to beating Texas A&M. The Hogs got off to a great start in that game, and then that field goal just doinked the wrong way. And as a Chicago Bears fan, I know exactly how that feels. And the rushing defense was really good at the start of the season. It kind of struggled against Texas A&M, but overall, I think this is a horrible matchup for Arkansas. Their pass defense has been rough. It was really good against Texas A&M, but I think that's more against the Aggies than it is in favor of the Razorbacks. And now they're going against a quarterback that just won the Heisman, so I don't really think it matches up really well. Arkansas is still allowing, even after that Texas A&M game, they're still allowing 302 pass yards per game. That's the 6th worst in the FBS. I think entering that this past week, they were the worst. So now they got to go against Bryce Young, who did not have his best game in Bama's one road game of the year against Texas. Alabama played Texas. That's what I'm thinking. My bad. But the Longhorns did do a better job with the passing game, so compared to Arkansas. So I think that Bryce Young will be just fine in this game. I think Alabama's defense, though, has been really good so far, something that might not be talked enough because we're thinking about Bryce Young so much. But TRACR not only has Bama as the best team in college football now, that's new. We had Georgia as the best team all season long until this past week. The Tide are also the best team defensively per Tracer. And opponents are averaging 1.8 yards per carry against Alabama's defense. That's third best in the FBS. I mean, that's just unreal. So there's not going to be that much that Arkansas can do on the ground against this Bama team. They're really good up front, and they've also yet to allow a pass TD this year. So I think that's going to change. I think that Arkansas will get a pass TD. Maybe it'll be late, but overall, I don't think this is a good matchup for Arkansas, despite the fact that it might be their final loss going into bowl season, because I think that the rest of the schedule looks pretty good in favor of them. But I think they're going to lose this one, and I think Bama is really good. We have them number 1 overall. Tracer has them with a 78% chance of winning this game, and I think they will do just that. I think they will pass all over this Arkansas Razorbacks team.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think Alabama is really strong. I think the week 2 scare that they got there, Texas on national television there
That
on
game was
Fox.
so hot,
Yeah,
like Texas is better than we think. I think that was more in favor of Texas rather than Alabama.
yeah, I agree. I agree. It was more a referendum on Texas's talent, but they still haven't been able to put it all together as we've seen over the last couple weeks and some close losses that they had. But I'm with you. I don't think this game is close. If anything, maybe a 38-10, 38-14 type of game. I don't see how the Razorbacks can keep up with Alabama's offense, and I don't see how they can score against Alabama's defense. That's the most important part. So we like Alabama there. Let's go into a Big 12 matchup that would probably on a normal day have college game day and be the game of the day as Oklahoma State, the 9th-ranked Cowboys, head over to Baylor to take on the Bears. I'm always interested with Baylor because the program is so interesting and the talent that has come out of that program in recent years. And this year, they just had a big road win up at Iowa State recently. And they haven't really, before that, they played BYU earlier in the year and had a close loss there. But their non-conference haven't really played anybody of note. A good bounce back win for the Bears last week, whereas Oklahoma State has looked pretty good so far. Now, they've only played 3 games so far, and we've seen the opponents that they've played fire one of their coaches already. They hit the Sun Devils, letting go of Herm Edwards, and that's who Oklahoma State beat in week 2. So they haven't really been tested. Central Michigan, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, nobody there of note, and they had a bye week, and now they get ready to head into Waco to take on the Bears. What are you expecting out of this Big 12 matchup?
Well, first off, I'm excited for this game just because it's a rematch after that incredible Big 12 championship game last season. Remember, the Baylor Bears held the Cowboys at the goal line to win at the last second. It was one of the best games all year. It was so exciting. I remember just like jumping off the couch when that play happened. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. But I do like Baylor in this game, and I'll explain why. Oklahoma State's offense has looked great so far, but as you mentioned, it's all come against weaker teams. The defense has looked a lot better over the last 2 weeks, but it came against weaker teams. And we saw this last season too, actually. The Cowboys put up great numbers defensively against weaker teams like Kansas and West Virginia, but towards the end of the season, they were allowing more, especially from the passing game. Oddly enough, they did actually win their bowl game last year against Notre Dame, despite allowing more than 500 pass yards, but I digress. Tracer has Oklahoma State as the 16th best team, and I will stand by that for now. I think that's an adequate ranking for them right now. They still need a tougher true test, and this is their first real test on the year, as you mentioned. But Tracer also really likes Baylor. They are 6th overall with the highest chance of winning the Big 12 at about 27%. The Big 12 is pretty even right now with a few good teams that anyone can take it. Kind of like how it was last year. But I wasn't quite impressed with how the Bears handled a tough road game against Iowa State, a game where the Cyclones kept crawling back but actually never had a lead in that game. And I credit Baylor's both offense and defense in that game for making sure that Iowa State didn't really have a chance in that game. Baylor is more balanced, both on both sides of the thing. I think Oklahoma State can be a little tipsy here and there on both sides, and I think this is the Bears, big test. And now that they are home, big first home game of the season. They had 2 home games against weaker teams, so I think they will take full advantage of that. Tracer has the game at 68%, so 32%, I guess, for Oklahoma State. But I will like Baylor in this game, in a game that I think will be close at first, but Baylor will eventually pull away with.
Yeah, I'm with you as well too. I think the home crowd with Baylor there, and we mentioned about the defense was pretty good in that tough loss to BYU. But I don't like the way Oklahoma State has looked in the non-conference against, powder puff teams. I mean, obviously they're scoring a lot of points, but they're not getting tested athletically. And Baylor has some athletes on that side, on both sides of the football, that should be able to test Oklahoma State. Plus, their home. Give me the Baylor Bears in that matchup. Let's move into ACC country because, again, on a normal week, some of these matchups would have all the pomp and circumstance. But this is probably the biggest game of the day, Saturday night game in Death Valley, as the NC State Wolfpack, the 10th ranked team in the country, head to Clemson to take on the Clemson Tigers. I mentioned this before we started, when we started our first episode, how NC State was my team to watch. I predicted they would be undefeated. I'm not that hard when you play UConn and you play Charleston Southern, but they had a scare in week 1 against East Carolina. We talked about that game. And obviously they played Texas Tech, who has looked pretty decent in the Big 12 as well, and in non-conference as well. So not really super tested for the Wolfpack minus the Texas Tech and week 1 games. They've had a couple cupcakes, like I mentioned, in between there. And now Devin Leary and the boys get set for a primetime game against a Clemson team right now that is probably starting to click on all cylinders. Defensively last week, I mean, they're playing one of the best quarterbacks in the country that Wake Forest has. But before that, they didn't really play anybody of note. We talked about how that Georgia Tech game week 1 wasn't going to be much of a game, and it wasn't. It ended up being a 41-10 final. Then they played Furman and Louisiana Tech in subsequent weeks. And Clemson, obviously, last week, a lot of folks making the drive to North Carolina in support as they beat the Demon Deacons there in double overtime. And now they get set to host this big night game that Dabo Swinney is licking his chops at to see what his team can finally do against a top-ranked NC State team. What are you looking for in this matchup, Evan, that the people should be watching for?
Well, it sounds like you have NC State, which I know you had them as your team to watch out for, but I'd be very
Wolf.
surprised if they win this game. I'll be honest. This is another game actually where the AP poll and Tracer differ immensely. We have number 10 with NC State and number 5 Clemson in the AP poll. Clemson is actually 22nd in Tracer, and NC State is actually 40th in Tracer. We think they are a good but not amazing team, not a New Year's Six team. And, I think we saw that with that East Carolina game, a game that they should have lost. I mean, remember, they would have at least gone to overtime if it weren't for that missed extra point. They had a missed field goal chance to win it. So I think NC State really escaped with a lucky win there. And I don't know if they've really impressed me that much throughout the rest of the season. So Clemson, that game last week, I think, the fact that they were able to pull that game out is immensely impressive. I do really like Wake Forest as well. We'll talk about them later. But I think that the fact that Clemson has home field advantage, the fact that they are better overall per Tracer and just per my own opinion, and they've already been tested this season with Wake Forest. I think Clemson easily has this game. I actually don't think it's going to be that exciting of a game compared to some of the other games that we have on the slate. But Tracer has this game with Clemson with about a 73% chance of winning this game. So there's still a decent chance that NC State wins this and pulls it out. But I think, as you mentioned, Dabo Swinney is going to be all hyped for this game. I think it's going to be a crazy game with the atmosphere, but I think Clemson has this one relatively easy.
Not so fast, my friend.
No, get out of here.
Well, listen, I mean, I think last week, DJ's going up against, Sam Hartman, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And
Oh, he's so fun.
yeah, it was such a fun matchup to watch both quarterbacks. I mean, DJ on the season so far, he has 10 touchdowns to 1 interception. He already got over 1,000 yards passing, but that really was his game to keep up with another signal caller on the opposite side of the field that's going to be playing on Sundays. And now this week he's going against another guy who is potentially going to be playing on Sundays in Devin Leary. I like what NC State can do offensively when they're clicking. The problem is like you said, a night game in Death Valley. I just don't see how they can do enough offensively unless they come out really firing. And they haven't done that when they've played competition that is of similar ilk. The East Carolina game, obviously an in-state rivalry, East Carolina home. You can I mean, but that rivalry wasn't close over the last 4 or 5 matchups. And then the Texas Tech home game was the one that I had a lot of focus on. That was a night game on ESPN2 here in the States. And so that matchup spoke to me because Devin Leary was able to go toe to toe against another good signal caller in the Texas Tech quarterback. And Thayer Thomas played pretty well in the game. I just don't see how they score enough points here with the way DJ has been clicking the last couple of weeks, and specifically the way he played in the 2 overtime periods last week against Wake. I'm with you. I think the game will be close. I know you think it won't be close. I actually think it will be close, but Clemson wins late, something like a 28-20 type of game. I
Okay,
like the
yeah.
Tigers as well, even though I NC State was my team to watch, but I did say probably one loss, and they'll be like a one loss type surprise team. I think this is the loss for them. Let's end on a high note here. I mentioned them at the top of the program, and 0-4 last season, 4-0 this season. The Florida State Seminoles are rocking and rolling with Jordan Travis up there at the Doak. They get set to take on a team we just talked about who played Clemson last week in Wake Forest. A good matchup out of the ACC. Again, a lot of good matchups. So many of them that are just two teams ranked in the top 25, and it could go either way if the teams were playing either home or away. What are some of your thoughts here on Wake Forest trying to bounce back after last week's tough game? Florida State not having too much of a challenge last week with Boston College and the way they got off to a hot start, leading 21-0 before even the end of the first quarter. What are you looking for in this matchup as Florida State looks to return to prominence this season and get off to a 5-0 start?
We might look back on last week's Wake Forest and Clemson game and say that it's one of the best games of the year. Offensively, it obviously was. And that's kind of what Wake Forest is all year. They're kind of a funny team per tracer, similar to Iowa. We were talking about that before. Offensively, the Demon Deacons rank seventh in tracer offensively. Defensively, they are 62nd with a defensive rating of 0.0. Shout out Animal House. That basically means that they are a completely average team defensively, but offensively, they are among the elites. We saw this against Clemson exactly. They put up 45 points against the Tigers in double overtime. They barely lost. Sam Hartman had 6 touchdown passes and no picks. And though they lost that game, I was quite impressed. And Florida State is kind of a similar team. They're good offensively, bad defensively, but less so. They rank 13th offensively and 49th defensively. So that, not as significant of a gap, but still pretty big gap. And the Seminoles have also had good tests. They snuck past LSU and Louisville. We talked about that before. And I think it's surprising that they are 4-0. And it's a good surprise. I think it's good that Florida State is back. It's kind of weird. I always think that the 3 main Florida schools, Florida, Florida State, and Miami, they all seem to rotate as to which teams are the best each year. It's like a couple of years it's Florida State, then it's like Florida, then it's Miami, and now it seems like it might be back in Florida State. So it's kind of a fun revolver. All in the Florida, it seems like one school is always really good, one is okay, and one is bad, and that seems like really good comparison this year. But anyways, Tracer has a game with Florida State at 58%. I think a home field advantage is going to be a significant factor there, but I'm going to pick the upset here. I think I was really impressed with Wake Forest last week against Clemson, and I think offensively they can carry themselves no matter where they are. So I am going to go with Wake Forest, so long as rain isn't a huge factor in this one too.
Yeah, that's the big thing for me. If the matchup still takes place at the Doak and whatever remnants of Hurricane Ian that's taking place right now, as we're recording this, is obviously hitting the Tampa, Sarasota area as the cone continues to move up into northern Florida. We don't know what's going to happen with that game if it gets moved to somewhere else. If it gets moved to Wake, the prediction could change here. But here's a stat presented by Pressbox Live. Jordan Travis, for me, ranks 20th amongst FBS quarterbacks right now in passing efficiency. And he's had considerable improvement. Right now, he's at 169.1 passing efficiency, whereas a few years ago, 128.6, and then the year before, 148.9. He has improved steadily every season. And we are seeing now that he is one of, or at least vying for, one of the best quarterback slots. So many good quarterbacks we've just mentioned throughout all of these matchups. If you look, Bryce Young, we mentioned him, obviously. We mentioned DJ, boy, if I could say his last name, Ugalele,
Yeah,
from Clemson. We had Sam Hartman, we mentioned. And now Jordan Travis. Again, it's about the quarterback on the opposite side staying off the field. Florida State in their matchup so far against LSU, against Louisville. Louisville's quarterback is really good too. But Jordan Travis has bested those quarterbacks in each of these matchups. He's looked really good, efficient, dominant, hasn't turned the ball over. I just mentioned his passing efficiency. I like I like the game atmosphere at Florida State. I think Wake right now, after what happened last week, I think they will play well in this game. But I think Florida State's got a little bit of the mojo right now. And I think overall body of work, I think Florida State has played some tougher games, specifically at Louisville and a neutral site game at LSU, playing teams that have just as good talent, if not better, specifically on the LSU side. And so I think Florida State is tested for this. I think they're chomping at the bit to try to prove that this 4-0 start is not a fluke. And I think Jordan Travis leads them to victory on Saturday at the Doak. I really like Florida State. My thank yous to Evan Boyd here, who is one of the best predictors in the business. I just gave you that moniker there.
Please, Evan. Please. Thank you. Yeah.
Take it. All the stats and insights that you heard today. Obviously, you could check out a lot of the metrics that Evan mentioned over on theanalyst.com, or check out statsperforms.com, and you can check out the new Pressbox Live tool. A lot of the stats and insights that you heard today are a part of that tool. Head to statsperform.com today to see how Pressbox Live is helping college football teams, leagues, and broadcasters augment their game day coverage. We will see you in a few weeks with the College Football Day-to-Day show. For Evan Boyd, I am Mike Leon. So long, everybody.